Hello and welcome to another Atheist Alliance International video interview. I'm John Richards and my guest today is Dr. Lauryn Oates. Lauryn is a human rights activist who specializes in education and women's rights in conflict zones, particularly in Afghanistan, where she has been leading the development of a multilingual online database of educator resources for Afghan teachers, with plans to open an e-learning lab for the teachers. She has an amazingly long list of achievements and awards for someone so young. I'm just going to give you a brief flavour because otherwise she won't get to speak before our time is up. She's authored numerous reports on Afghanistan for organizations such as Global Rights, Medica Mondiale, the Afghan Research and Evaluation Unit, UNICEF, the Women and Children's Legal Research Foundation, and Womankind Worldwide. She has served as a consultant or an advisor to USAID, the Nike Foundation, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and other agencies. In 2013, she was awarded the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal for Community Service, and she even finds time to write articles for various publications, including Huffington Post. She doesn't know this, but I plan to ask her to write a piece for Secular World before this interview is over. That's a spoiler alert. My information is probably out of date, Lauryn, since I got it from the Royal Roads University alumni site. Can you bring us up to speed with what you've been doing more recently?
Sure. Well, actually, I still am involved with Royal Roads University. I teach there once a year in their School of Humanitarian Studies to graduate students. So that's a lot of fun. And that's kind of the 1 month of the year that I pause my practice work in the field of development to think a little bit about the theory and research and all that fun stuff and become a nerd for a little bit and then go back out to the field. But day to day, normally I'm involved in planning and designing and then delivering education programs in developing countries, usually at war, and most frequently Afghanistan. That's really where my regional expertise lies, and I've worked there for a long time. Going back to the first time I went was just after the fall of the Taliban. So I tend to work on programs to do with teacher education because I really see that as the key way to reform the education system. And Afghanistan's was really had to be built from the ground up, so a lot of work was needed. So I thought teachers was a good place to start. And then I also do a lot of stuff around language and helping people access the right to go to school in their own language and have resources in their own language. So I do a little bit of that in Afghanistan, and that's what I studied when I did my doctorate. So yeah, a lot of kind of project design and management type stuff, which can be both, sort of desk work and not as glamorous maybe as people sort of think of an aid worker, how their day-to-day work goes, but it's certainly fulfilling because I think it can make a big difference ultimately. So yeah, that's my work in a nutshell is education programming.
It's a lot of, you've bitten off a big mouthful there, haven't you? I've found out something about the Taliban and the situation in that part of the world by reading Malala Yousafzai's book.
Oh, yeah.
But I understand that it's not quite so horrible now. I think the Taliban are now a history item rather than current. Is that the case?
Yes and no. I mean, their history in terms of their popular appeal, they never had great popular appeal. They obviously didn't sort of try to get elected by appealing to the popular vote. They took power by brute force and imposed themselves. They were never recognized as the official regime of Afghanistan, except for 3 countries. When they were in power, they weren't recognized by the UN and so on. So they were always somewhat unwelcome by even Afghans themselves. And even after they were removed and they became, insurgents fighting against the new government, there were surveys done. You can find them online. They're pretty interesting. There's a whole bunch, but one that's been done actually every single year is called the Survey of the Afghan People, and it asks questions about sort of what people think of the Taliban, and it's always registered incredibly low numbers. And you will find variation by regions, more popularity in the south than the north, for example, but generally their popular appeal is negligible in the country at large. So what do they have? They have weapons and violence. That's the only way they can try to impose power, and they certainly do. And of concern to the education sector is that they've really targeted education because they know the power of education to influence minds and to create a citizenry that is never going to allow a group like the Taliban to be in power again. So it's not collateral damage. It's really a direct intention of theirs to destroy schools. They murdered teachers. There was a principal beheaded in Kandahar years back. They threatened parents. They leave something called night letters in communities that say, if you send your daughters to school, we will find you and we will kill you. So that actually is ongoing. They've burned down schools as well, thrown grenades in schools. So going to school is dangerous because of the Taliban. So they're still around. The extent of violence they can perpetrate depends where they are. They have more power in some areas over others. But these days, even in Kabul, they perpetrate attacks every single day. So they're not in power as the government, but they're around and they're causing trouble. But what's remarkable is that people go on with their day-to-day life. Obviously, it's dangerous and it shouldn't have to be, but people are still going to school and they're still going to their jobs. And in less than 2 weeks, there's going to be an election, and there's women running for parliament in that election. So all this progress has kept happening despite the Taliban. And my view is that we have to keep holding that ground and letting people grow in that space, and then they are going to be obsolete eventually, ideally. And one of the really big areas of progress has actually been technology, and that's helped so much in decreasing Afghans' isolation from the rest of the world. They can go online. I just attended a conference where someone said that I think it's 15% of Afghans are active online users now. And, every Afghan has hundreds of relatives.
Yes.
And so for every person that's sort of better connected in the world, they have a group of people around them that is also then accessing information. And that's just made an incredible difference over the years.
The wonders of the mobile age, the technology.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and mobiles, you mentioned mobiles. That's something especially interesting. Afghanistan didn't have its phone line system was totally destroyed in the war. And rather than rebuild it like the old-fashioned landline system, they just went totally mobile.
Yeah.
And
who needs wires?
And today you have more than 80% of Afghans have a mobile phone.
Yes.
And often they sort of Afghans will make fun of my old-fashioned mobile phones, or how I'm not as efficient on my phone, because that's so much a day-to-day part of their life. That's how they use the internet and so on. So they're pretty savvy with their mobile use.
So they have fast enough speed to do data collection, do they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Internet
that's
surfing.
one of the projects I work on. We've put internet in teacher colleges in the computer labs there, and we use the mobile phone connection to sync a local area network computers in quite remote areas. A lot of areas have solar power as well, so if they don't have good access to a power grid, they can use solar to power a computer lab. So yeah, there's really, really neat things happening with tech. And in a context like that, you actually are almost more free to kind of experiment when the traditional things don't work. So yeah, we've got some good little rudimentary systems up and running in some places that you probably wouldn't expect that you'd be able to get a Wi-Fi signal.
It's wonderfully liberating, isn't it? And good for freedom, as long as the government, whoever's in control, doesn't try and put a stop to it like they do in China, where you have limited access to certain websites.
That's true. And in neighboring Iran, right? Afghanistan shares the border in the west with Iran. And I was in Herat in that part of the country once, close enough to the border that it was interfering with my internet access.
Oh.
I was trying to Google stuff and all these sites were blocked. I was working on a research report and I was wondering what's going on. This isn't happening in Kabul. And then I realized it was actually the much more sophisticated work of the Iranian government in interfering people's access.
Well, let's hope your government don't get that capability.
I hope so.
Now, I'm a retired teacher, so I'm in agreement with you about the importance of motivation in education. I read your HuffPost article, and we all know that if a pupil doesn't have an aspirational attitude, they won't reach their potential. And over here in the UK, it's one of the most frustrating things, teachers watching students who have ability, but they're just coasting along, wasting their opportunities. That's not a problem in developing countries, is it?
That's certainly true. There's a filter, really. The kids that actually make it to school, they're the ones that their motivation is so high because of the work it took to get there and the obstacles they had to overcome. Things like poverty, things like maybe resistance from their family members in the case of girls, or the long distance to school. So all these factors come into play, and by the time those who actually get to the classroom are there, those are the ones that are just going to make it no matter what. So yeah, you find them highly motivated and they're showing up to class when they're dealing with conditions like I've seen in Afghanistan, where maybe there's no textbooks, where you have very high rates of teacher absenteeism. So you might have no teacher actually coming to class, which is such an injustice to these kids and their motivation. So yeah, it's a huge difference, and it's very, very enlightening when you come back to a country like Canada and compare, and then you can't help but say those cliche things like, if you saw the level of effort and motivation that I've seen, then you would want to go to school, you would put in more effort.
Yes. It's difficult to motivate them here.
Yeah.
Now, Atheist Alliance International, of course, is particularly interested in teaching critical thinking, especially in developing countries. Does anything like that go on in Afghanistan?
No, not very much. It's starting in the higher education levels because there's been this explosion of higher education institutions, universities, both public and private. The American University opened a branch in Kabul, so that's a very popular place to attend school, and students there who tend to be the elite and can access that kind of opportunity, though there's scholarships too, they can get sort of education that you might find in parts of the developed world. But for most students in schools like public schools, basic education schools, even teacher colleges, that's missing from the education system. And over the years, as I was always trying to dig down and figure out, what is the fundamental thing to focus on? How can we really make a difference in the school system? I started to come to the conclusion that it was that ability to teach critical thinking. If teachers were able to do that themselves, and if they could instill that in their students, it would open up a world of possibility. So it's easy to say, it's a harder thing to do, and that's much of the work I do now is kind of focused on that, how to actually do that curriculum reform, and how do you do that with adults who never had that in their own school system.
Yes.
And even I see it in Canada often too, that where people really don't know how to think critically. where university students at the graduate level sometimes don't know how to think critically. So then how do you take a teacher in Afghanistan that didn't get that, in their own grade school system, in their own higher education, and then try to help them understand how to teach it? So it's a huge challenge, but I love challenges. So it's a great place for me to focus on.
It's so easy to be complacent, isn't it? Especially in a comfortable country. And it's comparatively hard to check everything out for yourself critically. Take what you're told is the easy route, and examine and criticize and be skeptical. That's the hard way forward.
Absolutely, yeah, that's very true. And I think the older we get, we fall into our habits and patterns much more, and we don't want to kind of deviate and take the path less explored. So it's really hard work to kind of self-examine and think of your habits and sort of see things in a new way and new perspectives. We need tools to do that for sure.
Except for that 65-year-old lady that I read about in your article, who turned up to learn her alphabet. So it's not just pupils, is it? It's not just the young.
Yeah, and that woman was in a literacy class. So here you have someone that's never been to school ever, never stepped foot in a classroom, and at that age they go and they start learning, ABC, and that's very, very, very hard for adults to learn literacy when they don't have that school experience, and their brains haven't had to look at the characters of the script over time. There's a lot of research about this, so it's incredibly challenging. And the amazing thing is that these women become literate. Months in, they're reading fluently, and then they're reading books at home to their kids and grandkids. And I have to say that out of all the hours I spend sort of doing very dull work like writing reports and designing log frames and working with spreadsheets, the thrilling part is being in a classroom and watching a person become literate. There's just nothing like it in the world, and it makes it all worth it. It's
wonderful work. I always think that teaching is like a gift to mankind. It's a pretty honorable profession.
Yeah, I think it's the place to be. It's not where I started out, actually. I worked in human rights. I saw what was going on in Afghanistan during the Taliban, and I said I have to do something about this. And I was involved in all these human rights projects, like human rights workshops for girls and women and so on. And these girls and women would say, well, we know that we should have rights. It's not like we think that it's right that we get denied an education or we get treated differently than men and boys, but we can't get.
Our connection is breaking, I fear. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you. It just froze for a second. It seems to have come back now.
Good. Now, you had a plan to do some e-learning project for teachers. How's that been going?
It's going really well. It's called Darak de Danesh, which means knowledge tree in Dari or Farsi, and it's a library of learning materials in Afghan languages as well as English that teachers can search. It's open to anyone, not just teachers. And since it works in English as well, you can go and check it out. And one of my colleagues calls it like a little Wikipedia for Afghanistan. So you go on and you can search, say you want to teach your students about water evaporation. You can search and pull up lessons, and you can use those as is, or you can adapt them for your classroom. But we started it because we saw that there weren't those kinds of learning materials in classrooms, and actually about half or more of Afghan teachers don't have any formal teaching qualifications, so they were never trained how to teach. And there they are in classrooms trying to teach. So we wanted to give them access to resources, and lots of schools don't have libraries. Sometimes they don't even have textbooks. So we use technology to skip ahead and make that path shorter for them to access learning materials, so they can find stuff in all the school subjects and more. And we really have been building it based on demand, so it gets bigger all the time. And we work with volunteers all over the world. Usually we call them the hyphenated Afghans, Afghan Canadians, Afghan Americans, and lots of Afghans in Afghanistan who have areas of expertise and who are bilingual or multilingual. and they translate openly licensed materials from outside Afghanistan and put them into Afghan languages. And then we make sure that teachers can access them in the field. So we do that by connecting them through the teacher colleges, through the computer labs there, by using tablets, and by mobile phones. Since most Afghans have mobile phones, they can then access the library that way. And the next phase of our work is courses, full online courses, or MOOCs, massive open online courses, and these will be the first ones in Afghanistan. So we're just working on that now, and the very first topic we're going to do is critical thinking.
Excellent. So what do you need to further your work? If you had a magic wand, what would you wish for?
The Taliban to go away and the violence to stop, but something maybe more accessible than that. I mean, one thing we need is we need people to believe in places like Afghanistan. It's so easy to just get stuck in a negative perception and to say, oh, it will never change. There's no point. We have our own issues in our own country. Let's focus on those, and to really emphasize differences between, say, us and Afghans than sameness, because they're very exoticized in the media. They're often demonized in the media. And of course, the Taliban have good reason to be demonized, but the Taliban don't represent all Afghans. And I have to say that, in the 2 decades that I've been doing this, I have met the hardiest Democrats, feminists, progressive-minded people in Afghanistan. I mean, dissidents and activists who are trying to change their country in the most challenging, difficult circumstances imaginable. And they really have something to teach us about values like democracy and gender equity. But it's harder to access those voices. So I think listening to those voices from Afghanistan, listening to someone like Malala Yousafzai and what she has to say about girls' education and women's rights over the Taliban. Because when we listen to the Taliban, then you see they give fodder to the cultural relativists. The people who say, well, their culture is fundamentally different. We should mind our own business, let them be how they want to be, even if we don't agree with it. I don't buy that at all. Probably the most important conclusion I've come to doing this work is that human rights are actually universal, that there is some universal basis to the idea that we should all have dignity, and rights are the way to get to dignity. So I think that's really important, is that sort of just adopting that philosophical view on our obligations towards other people outside our own borders. And it's maybe been more challenging in Canada because we're geographically on the opposite side of the world from Kabul. I know that from traveling, over oceans so many times. It's really far away. And when you're far away from people, you can it's sort of easier to come up with myths about them. And then more concretely, there's a lot of things people can do to help. You can look up a website, Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan. There's a page on that website about concrete, specific things people can do: volunteering, holding fundraisers, how to get more aware and informed of what's happening. Absolutely anyone can contribute to strengthening education and girls' access to education in Afghanistan. You don't have to have any background or experience in this. There's things that you can do to be involved, and we need people. Afghanistan's fallen out of the news a little bit now, so we definitely need more engagement and involvement from people all over the world. And actually, in the UK, there's the Linda Norgrove Foundation, which was a foundation established by the parents of an aid worker who was unfortunately killed in Afghanistan in 2009. And her family, they're doing really, really great work, including to support education. They have a scholarship fund for girl medical students. So people can look up the Linda Norgrove Foundation, and they're all volunteer based as well. So lots of things that can be done from within the UK as well.
Publicity is what you want, and we'll do our best to make sure you get some. I'll put links to those sites that you mentioned in the end of this video. Lauryn, thank you very much. More power to your elbow, as they say. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great. Take care. Bye-bye.